Welcome to Parenting Adventures. We help parents empower their kids to build a growth mindset so they can tackle any size challenge that school and life can throw at them. From grades to bullying and struggles at home and school, and everything in between. Whether you're in the elementary alphabet stage or navigating high school credits, we're diving into how you can relate and influence positive action. Stick around for real solutions, expert tips, and stories that resonate and inspire. Ready for personalized mindful tutoring? Head to tutorteach.ca/tutoring to see how our 9 cornerstones to success have helped over 3,000 students achieve their goals. Now, let's dig into the episode.
Do you ever find yourself frustrated with your child's selective eating or wondering if what they're eating is impacting their relationships or academics? Well, today's episode is packed with the answers you've been searching for. I'm your host, Lara, and today we're chatting with Claire Kjeld, a registered dietitian who's been a trailblazer in the field of nutrition since 2006, working across the United States and Canada in settings ranging from primary care and wellness to sports and most recently, pediatric nutrition at Alberta Therapy Co. in Edmonton, Alberta. Claire is a powerhouse of knowledge when it comes to tackling feeding and nutrition challenges. Whether your child has food sensitivities, is a selective eater, or has specific dietary needs, Claire's seen it all. In today's episode, she shares game-changing strategies to help your kids try new foods, develop healthy eating habits, how to recognize when selective eating might be more than just a phase, and so much more. So get ready for an eye-opening conversation that will leave you empowered and inspired. Keep listening. You won't want to miss a minute of this conversation. So I know you have a pretty fascinating journey and your career has taken you all over. And today you're working with children and families at Alberta Therapy Co. in Edmonton, Alberta. So before we get started, I have to ask, what inspired you to become a registered dietitian and what was your journey in getting to where you are today?
Oh, it's so fun. I went to high school in Edmonton and I was obsessed with food, just in general. From when I was little, I would always want to try to cook something in the kitchen with my parents. My mom, though, was always one that pushed me out and was like, no, 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 get out of the kitchen, get out of the kitchen. So I would wait until she was at work and then I would cook. And so when I got into high school, where foods was an elective, I grabbed onto absolutely every opportunity I could to go into foods. And so I actually became very close friends with my foods instructor in high school. And I remember saying to her, I want to be a chef. And she said, no, you don't. I said, yes, I do. She goes, do you want to have a family someday? Do you want to work on weekends and evenings? And I was like, well, I want to have a family, but no weekends and evenings. She said, well, then you don't want to be a chef. And I said, well, what do I want to be? And she said, you want to be a dietitian. And I said, oh, wow, I don't even know what that is. And so it really just started from there. And she guided me and encouraged me and helped me find a school that was a good match for me. And the rest is history.
So it's safe to say that that teacher stands out to you.
That teacher stood out to me. And honestly, throughout university, I would come back home and I'd visit her on every single break that I had. I would go back to high school and I'd knock on her door and say, hey, it's me. And she was always just the best. Always so awesome and so encouraging. And I've run into her now since it's been 25 years since I graduated high school. And I still run into her now and again. And it's just it's like she's my best friend. I just love her so much. I'm sure we aren't best friends, but she's probably like, oh, geez, it's you again. But yeah, she's definitely one of my key guiding lights throughout my life, honestly.
Everyone needs a teacher like that or a mentor like that in their lives, that as children, they are always the same to us. They never change to us, but we keep growing and they never truly understand the impact that they've had on us and our young minds. And so she might see you passing by and give you a wave and you're like, you're one of my heroes when you're waving back,
100%. I view her as the level of Oprah, right? She's right up there for me for Oprah. Shout out to Miss Roberts.
We all need a Miss Roberts. And yeah, I relate to that completely. I had a teacher tell me that one day he wanted to see me do something with my writing skills and didn't know what that meant for me. But he said I was one of the strongest writers he had in high school. And that was one of the first teachers who took the time to highlight a positive on me. And it changed the course of my education. It changed the course of my life. And I don't think he'll ever know it.
No, he has no idea. That's incredible just to have that kind of impact with the smallest little things sometimes, right?
Absolutely. You've seen a lot of kids and families over the years. What are some of the biggest feeding and nutrition challenges you see with kids today?
Feeding and nutrition challenges, I would say some of the easiest stuff in my eyes are more around just the pressures that exist for parents and the pressures that exist for children because of those pressures from parents. So, we think about the roles of parents of, making sure our kids are fed, making sure our kids are clothed, making sure that they're educated, all those key core things. And feeding is such a core requirement that really is the duty of a parent. And so sometimes though, right, parents, if the child's not eating very well, sometimes there's that intense, like, approach that gets put on around making sure that that child is eating and making sure that their needs are being met, but at the detriment of the kid. So one of the biggest challenges for many parents is just that creating that positive environment that is pressure free, is stress free, anxiety free. And that is so hard to do, right? Because if your kid's not eating well, you're going to be anxious, you're going to be stressed, you're going to be, upset. And it's hard to stay calm and it's hard to, not use some of the tactics like pressure and bribery and, you got to eat this and then you get this kind of approach. So I'd say that's like the number one thing that I would, probably the most common thing I start with families is let's just change up the environment here and change up the tone of meals so that they're not so stressful. Um, Regardless of, what the child's doing, we know that a stressful environment is never going to be in a good equation of improving a child's eating.
I'm leaning into that 100%. I can hear myself telling my kids, well, if you just take one last bite, why don't you have a cookie after, or, some fruit or whatever. And so it definitely feels like you're doing a trade-off with them at the supper table.
Yeah, it just becomes a barter kind of situation. Rarely does that work. Um, in the end, it's no longer the child's decision. They're not really using their internal guide to say, you know what, I really feel like eating this and I really love this. It now puts different foods on different levels, which is not something we like for, the relationship with foods over life. So many of us as adults, right? Like we have these good food, bad food relationships, and that starts really young by saying you got to eat this one first before you get this one. And usually the reward one is the food that doesn't have as much of the nutritional value. When, unfortunately, when we put it on different levels, those foods that are less nutritious, then, they become sort of forbidden. And we then get into kind of cycles of, oh, I shouldn't eat this, but man, it's good, but it's forbidden. And oh, that cycle of restriction sometimes can be really tough where we end up restricting and then in the end eating it and then some. Right. So it starts as young as that and increasing that positive relationship and that, all foods are equal kind of approach, which is really hard to do and hard to convince parents to do when we've been taught like, hey, this is what we should be eating most of the time. And these are the things that we should really limit and eat as treats once in a while. Just, yeah, unfortunately, some of those messages that we have really sometimes can really negatively impact the feeding relationship at home.
And I wonder how much of the generational trend there a little bit, where as parents today, I might be feeding off of how my parents etiquette around the dinner table and then my husband's etiquette around his dinner table. And then we're meshing the two. That's what's getting transferred to our children and then so forth.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I think of that too. And I'm, not to throw my husband under the bus, but he grew up in a home where it's like we don't talk at the dinner table. This is a job, like we're eating and we finish what's in front of us. And, for me, it was very much like conversational at the table and how was your day and very fun and, enjoyable and no pressure to finish eating. And it's okay if you want to eat dessert as part of your meal or not, no big deal, right? And his was very much more like finish it, don't talk. And once you've finished, you get dessert kind of thing. So regardless of how you feel, if you're completely stuffed, doesn't matter that now you get the prize. And it just becomes this pretty negative cycle. So he's had to deal with that in the upbringing of our kids too, is like, oh man, I'm always like, it's okay if you don't want to finish that, that's fine. Like it's available later. Like, yeah, of course, like you want a little bit of dessert too alongside your meal. That's fine. If you don't eat all of that, who cares? Like, and so, there's definitely battles that happen just internally between the two of us. Like, oh man, oh, no, you shouldn't be doing that. Or, hey, that's not what I'm used to seeing. So, yeah, it's really challenging for a lot of parents that come up in very different households with different approaches. And that's really all we have to guide us a lot of times on how do we parent our kids.
100%. I feel that. So, picky eating seems to be a universal challenge for parents, but how can parents tell the difference between typical picky eating and more serious feeding issues?
Yeah. It's tough. I would say, like, number one, I'm gonna say I hate the word picky eating, or I hate that title. And I shouldn't say hate. My parents always say hate is not the word to use. It's not my favorite thing. It's not my favorite. Yeah, I always had to say that's not my favorite thing. Um, but yeah, no, I usually I say selective eating, right? So picky is more of just like, I don't want to eat that. And maybe they don't mind the food, but they're just like sort of being a bugger and they're not really, eating something that we know they like, and they're just being, power struggling along with the family. But honestly, like I don't see that often. I don't really see that kind of thing often. I see more of selective eating where kids are just like, I really don't like that food. Like, I really don't. And I, have some kind of pretty strong aversion to it. And oftentimes those aversions are more like sensory related aversions that can be, I really can't stand the smell of that food. Or, you know what, that texture is revolting. Or, when I swallow it, it gets stuck in my throat. Or when I look at it, I find that it's like looking at a plate of maggots, right? Like there's sometimes these pretty extreme experiences that kids are having around foods that we don't really explore. And when we see a kid refusing to eat something, it's like an automatic, you're picky. When in reality, there might be something quite a bit more significant going on in their own processing of their sensory experience to that's way different than what we are experiencing. So I had an OT at one time say to me, and this whole maggot example, right? She said, for so many parents, it's like, oh, they're just not eating that. They're so picky. I make them eat a bite anyways, right? And she said to a parent when I was there, which I really appreciated the analogy because it was pretty intense. She just said, like for a lot of kids, like some foods are like being forced to eat a maggot, right? And or like a plate of bugs. And that to me was like, oh God. And the parents were like, oh my gosh, that's awful. But it's just lettuce or it's just a salad or whatever it may be. And to some kids, their experiences are that intense, right? And we don't necessarily know their intense experience because sometimes that communication isn't there to explain it, or they don't know how to, explain it. And so it might come out as crying or whining or getting frustrated or refusing. So, that's more of what I see. But we're sometimes just overly simplifying it and calling it picky without exploring a little bit deeper and saying, what is their experience and what is it about that food that is turning you off? Like it's not making you feel so great, right? So some of those questions that in children that are speaking, that we're able to have some of those conversations to explore it a little bit deeper so we understand what it is that they're experiencing. If they've got that ability to communicate with us, like that's where we want to go so that we can learn a little bit more about what it is that's really bothering them about that and maybe have the ability to make some adjustments to help them, right? So I guess I'm more just on the side of the kids, to be honest, to be like, hey, what's your experience? Tell me all about it. And when we take that approach with kids that are like, oh, I don't want this, it's amazing the difference where they're like, you get me. you are understanding me and now you're wanting to work with me? Cool. This is really neat. I would like to, I'm open to working with you and talking about how we can maybe be experimenters and be scientists and make changes so that it matches where it is that I have a good experience with with the food or with eating.
So if you make a whole plate of, say, chicken and pasta and vegetables, like a good balanced meal, and your child says, "Well, I don't want any of this." But sometimes they like it, sometimes they don't. It's kind of like fair weather appreciate. So what do you do? Do you just dispose of that plate and give them something different to eat? And
We talk about it. We definitely talk about it, but there's sort of like we want to set up the stage so that we have increased chances of success for them, right? So we want to make sure that the tone at the table is great, like that we're having a good stress-free environment for the kids to start with. Because sometimes kids are refusing to eat because it's a stressful place to be, right? So sometimes the parents are fighting, or maybe there's, the brother across the table who's just kicking you under the table. There might be some other things that are just contributing to that meal being completely aversive. I don't want to be here. No, thank you. Or I'm forced every time to sit at this table until everyone's done. That kind of environment. It's like, I don't want to be here. Get me out of here. Whereas sometimes maybe that food is accepted because they're eating by themselves or they're eating with their favorite person or, the tone in the room is lovely and there's music that's playing and they've gotten to help make the meal, right? So we want to set the stage so that walking into that meal when we sit down, the child is like happy to be there, right? And it's a welcoming space and enjoyable. There's no stress. There's no, it's fun. You want to be there. So that's number one, increasing the odds. Looking at if the child sits down, they're in a great environment, everything's been set up beautifully, and they say, I don't want this. We don't want to jump the gun and say, oh, this is so frustrating. Why don't you want this? Right? Like you have to take 10 bites, or how old are you? That's how many bites you have. Like those sorts of strategies that we use. It's more start asking questions, right? Hey, what's going on? What are you feeling? How was your day? Sometimes we just need to like do a little bit more about off from the food discussion and say, let's talk a little bit. Tell me about your day. Maybe they had a crappy day, right? Maybe they're stressed out. I've found with my kids, like sometimes they've already had a massive snack after school. And I've just gotten home from work and I'm assuming they're gonna have this amazing appetite when I get home and I've cooked this great meal and I sit down and we're all eating and the kid's not eating and I'm like, you have to take 10 bites. I would never do that, but pretend that I would. I would say, you have to take 10 bites. And they're like, no, I don't want to. And then battle, battle, battle. But had I ask that question, hey, how was your day? How was your day? Let's just take a sec. Don't worry. Just sit. I just want to be with you. And then you talk about it. I had a tough day or I had a good day or whatever. And then what'd you do after school today? Oh, like I watched a show and oh, did you have a snack today? Like what'd you have for snack today? And oh yeah, I had some chips and cheese. Oh, okay, that must have been really good. You must not be feeling very hungry, right? Is that kind of why you're not eating right now? Yeah, I'm really full. Oh, well, maybe we want to move this till later, give you a little bit more time to get hungry again, right? So I think it's just being an investigator instead of assuming that your child is, you know, just picky, right? There's a lot more to it than that, and we sometimes have to just explore and figure out what could it be.
yeah, I love that. And children, it's hard for them to advocate when they're little for themselves to say, you know what? I'm not hungry right now, but I might be in an hour. So can we just table this idea for a little bit and I'll come back to it? And as a parent, I'd be like, pardon me? Like, like I wouldn't expect them to even internalize it that way. And so we kind of, like you said, have to be the investigator. We have to put ourselves in their shoes a little bit and try and figure it out. And it's tough because they're at school during the day. So their eating patterns are a little bit different than when they're at home. When, on a Saturday or Sunday, we know exactly what's going on in their stomachs and we time it so that they do feel hungry for supper and they things kind of the day flows eating wise. Whereas at school on Fridays, they might get extra treats. They might be exchanging snacks with their friends. They might be trying new food. So it's really hard to know when they come home how full their bellies are.
Yeah. And I remember too when my kids were at daycare, like their snacks would be at like 4:30 p.m. and I would pick them up at 5. And sometimes no snacks were still preferred, right? Like maybe it's like, little pizza English muffins or something like that, right? And my kids had eaten like 3 of them because they loved them so much. And of course, they're not going to be hungry come 6 o'clock. They're stuffed. They've already kind of eaten dinner. And that's okay, right? They loved that. They had a great meal. Awesome. But I needed to ask those questions, right, at daycare to be like, how did snack go? Like, what was it today? Oh, English was it? I know my kids love those. And then we can chat about it on the way home. Oh, how are those English muffin pizzas? Oh, they were so good. I loved them. I ate 3. Oh, wow, that's amazing. You must have felt so good. We maybe want to push dinner a little bit later, or dad and I are going to eat dinner maybe earlier, and then we'll if you guys aren't so hungry, you let us know, like, maybe we wanna have dinner for you guys at closer to 7, right? So it's just like we're working together to figure out, what works for everyone, right?
No, that makes good sense. So, what are some factors that contribute to a child's lack of interest or outright refusal to eat? What are some things you consider when looking for that root cause?
Yeah, so sometimes it is more of that environmental piece that we've talked about, but sometimes there are medical pieces too, right? So I work with quite a few neurodiverse clients, so kids who are autistic or ADHD, and there's certainly components that we have to consider when it comes to kind of that food acceptance piece beyond just like, do I like this food or not, or sensory experience, those sorts of things. So sometimes I'm looking at medication impacts. So if kids are on medications that affect their appetite, that absolutely is a really big part of it that we have to consider. I also see a lot of gastrointestinal kind of things, constipation being number one, probably the number one reason why appetite is worse is the kid is full of poop, right? They're not pooping very much or not, well. And so constipation would be the very first number one biggest contributor to reduced appetite for so many kids. And so we often are looking at that as something we need to be addressing before we can assume that this is selective eating alone, right? We also look at things like, is this child experiencing reflux? Reflux is sometimes a silent thing, and kids often don't have that ability to communicate what they're experiencing. We might just be seeing crying or meltdowns or tantrums, or they're only eating small amounts and then leaving the table. There's lots of sort of hidden signs of that I'm very, very well aware of that I'm often asking parents about. And big picture, I'm able to see like, oh, this does sound like there is a suspicion here of reflux. So some of those complex kind of things can come up. Beyond that, we also look at nutrient deficiencies, like deficiencies in iron and zinc are common nutrients that affect appetite and are very commonly low. I would say iron being the number one that's on the low side for so many kiddos who are, maybe not big meat eaters or eaters of iron rich foods. Um, that's a really, really common deficiency that I see in over half my clients, to be honest, is they're just not getting enough iron, and that directly impacts appetite in a negative way. So we certainly look at the medical side of things. There are a lot more complex medical conditions of clients that I work with, like cerebral palsy kiddos. And, definitely we see Down syndrome kids, autistic kids, like I said, lots of different experiences that they're having because of neurodiversity and their sensory processing that is very different from ours. Um, but yeah, so those are the roots that I'm looking at. Whenever we're looking at feeding concerns, we don't want to just assume this is sort of a surface level thing. Rarely is it a surface level thing where they're just not eating it because it's brown. Like it's gonna be deeper than that so often. So we always want to start and investigate, kind of like the roots of a tree, right? We're looking under the surface for all those contributing factors that can be pretty massive as far as the impact it has on, the flowers or the leaves on the plant, which is what we see at the surface.
That's a really good analogy. And I think that is a great way to explain it, that it's more than meets the eye. It's not just what, kids can only vocalize so much. And even if they're a little bit older, they don't know the root of their concerns either.
Yeah. Sometimes there's like swallowing concerns. Sometimes there's dental concerns. Like they've got cavities in their teeth that the parents haven't noticed and they're not chewing because it hurts. Sometimes it's looking at they actually don't have the functionality of their chewing and their mouth and their tongue and all of those things. So the oral motor skills are lacking. Sometimes it's a muscle. They don't actually have the tone in their muscle to do all the work that's required to chew and to swallow. So there's so many more things that if a kid is presenting to a parent as like a bad eater, right? That's sort of I hear my kid's a bad eater or a terrible eater or a worse eater than their sibling. I don't want to say, oh, let's do a simple kind of approach to this of let's do some food play, right? No, that's not the right approach. The right approach is to ask questions. Why? What are those contributing factors that might be here at play? We want to look at everything. We want to look at the mouth. We want to look at the swallow. We want to look at the medical components, right? All of that stuff is so important. And I would say almost always there's something under the surface.
So what are some good strategies to get your kids to try new foods or food that they feel an aversion towards?
Okay, number one, no pressure. No pressure is always number one. So if you were to put a food in front of a child and they freak out, for lack of a better word, your reaction is also going to be super important. Your reaction is like, meh, okay. Calm, staying calm all the time. We are probably dying inside, right? Wanting to scream, wanting to throw the food across the room. We might want to force it in our kids' mouths and just be like, just try it. But key is you're not going to pressure your kid. You're not going to be stressed out. You're just going to be pretty indifferent. Having that approach of indifference with a child when it comes to exploring a new food or checking out a new food is so critical. The other is to model, right? Like model what we could do with the food. So if you think of like kids and eating, it's kind of like they're going to school and you are the teacher. The parent is the teacher. We want to be really good teachers. And what do really good teachers do? They teach in a variety of ways. They model, they do experiments. They are going to use I guess not the blackboard anymore, but the dry erase board and draw pictures. They're going to pull up the textbooks. They're going to, have a hands-on experiment. Like there's going to do all sides of things, but they're not going to force anybody to know everything, right? You're not going to have to be successful right from the get-go and know all the things as you walk into the class. That's the same thing with food. We don't want to expect our kids to know everything about everything with food and just all of a sudden ingest it. That's like you just graduated from high school without any kind of education. Or university without any education. So that's a really huge expectation. So in reducing that expectation on the kids to be amazing and to accept everything in sight and to expect actually that they will do nothing with the new food is where we want them to come in with, like the parents to have zero expectation. When we've got that, and we just simply look at the little things like the kid just looked at that food. That's actually a huge success, excuse me. That's a huge success. They looked at it. That's an exposure that they didn't have before. Amazing. They just learned something by looking at it. So low expectation. And then celebrating internally, not externally, where you're like, yay, you looked at it. No, don't do that. Stay calm, stay chill, be super chill. Like you could care less what they do with that food. And honestly, that is such a beautiful approach where the child doesn't feel like they have to perform for you. Like they have to, please you. When you celebrate and you're like, hooray, you just ate that, you'll notice, and I've seen this so many times and parents have shared it with me when I've given the same explanation is they're like, you're right. When I do celebrate, it's like they stop. And then oftentimes we'll just leave And they're like, ugh, I didn't know I was doing this for you. I thought this was for me, and now it's about you. No, thank you. Right? I'm out. And say goodbye to that food trial for a while. Because unfortunately, that celebration was just a form of pressure. Right? So, in general, staying chill all the time. Chill, chill, chill. Um, what else can I tell you? So, what at meals or at snacks, if you're introducing a new food, you're going to introduce it in a ridiculously small amount, and it's going to be with foods that you know your child likes already, right? So a food exposure for a new one, let's say we have a plate, and I know the kids' plates oftentimes for the little kids are more divided plates, so we can picture that divided plate. We've got maybe there's potatoes on one section, and maybe there's chicken on another section. Those are preferred foods for the kid. There's two, great. We know they've got something they like. They're probably gonna eat at least a little bit, and if they don't, no big deal, right? We know they like those foods. If they want to eat, they will. Um, but there's this little bit of blueberry, right? Which is a new food. Are we gonna put a half a cup of blueberries on the plate? Absolutely not. We're maybe gonna put one, right? Just a little one on the plate. And so as the child sits down, if that child sits down and looks at the blueberry and is like, oh, right? What do? We go, "Oh, is that too close?" Take that blueberry, we're gonna move it away, right? We're responding to that child, we're respecting them. They're saying, "Get this away from me," and sometimes they will throw it. We again are calm. We're calm. "Oh, you just told me you don't want that on your plate, and that's okay. We're gonna move it further away." If they still freak out, "Oh, we gotta move it even further away." And so we just work on kind of getting to their place of comfort, of tolerance, and then over time we can build on their tolerance to help kind of inch it closer. But yeah, it's meeting your child where they're at and making sure that they feel the support from you, that there's no force, there's no pressure. This is all about exploring. This is all about building comfort. That's it.
It's putting the child back in the driver's seat a little bit, and we're more of the passenger and letting them take control where we meet them. And like you said, it's really giving them the authority over their own choices, within reason. Obviously, we have to make sure that they have some balance and whatnot.
So there's a little bit I have to clarify with that too, right? So when we look at like where's that role of the child and the parent, this is good to clarify, is that technically the parent is still driving the car. Um, they are 100% still driving the car. Kids don't have the ability to, you know, think about meal planning. They can't really, they maybe have five foods in their brain and they're gonna be able to say, well, like if you say to them, "What do you feel like eating?" They're maybe gonna say, like, think of five foods and be like, chips, or cheese or whatever. They can't think of all the many foods that are at their disposal. So when it comes to what the parent job actually is, it is to decide what is going to be served from all the many things that they know are available. It is going to be where the food will be served and when the food will be served. So those are the three jobs that parents really are the driver of those jobs. What, when, where. The what, though, is important when we're considering a child and any child is we still want to make sure that we're offering them something that they will eat, right? So we want to look at always making sure there's at least one thing at every meal and snack that they will eat. So it doesn't become this ridiculous, like they've got nothing here that they feel safe with and they're not going to eat anything, right? We want to make sure there's something there that's safe for them. So always that. When it comes to a child's job, right, they are the passenger on those, on the what, when, where, but they are being considered, right? When it comes to the what, for sure, their preferences are known by the parent. Their jobs, though, when it comes to when are they driving the car, they are driving the car when it comes to if they eat or not and how much they eat, right? Those are the kids' jobs always. And there's sometimes, I shouldn't say sometimes, but really often those jobs are getting mixed up, right? the parents are like, "You didn't eat enough." Well, that's not your job, mom and dad. It's your child's job to say, "I ate enough," or "I don't wanna eat right now," or "I don't wanna eat, you know, that quantity." So it's really a tough one, but when we stay in our own lanes, it creates a lot better environment, for meals for the family.
Those are good clarification points, and I'm glad that you clarified that. That makes good sense. So, we all know teaching kids about nutrition can be tough, and the language that we use when doing so is important. How can parents approach these conversations and teaching opportunities in a way that's honest but also mindful?
Mhm. The language we use for sure is important. Using language like, "This is a healthy food, this is an unhealthy food, this is a good food, this is a bad food," those are language, or those are words that I wanna throw in the garbage. Um, and then it goes down to that creating that equal kind of playing field of all foods really are on the same level. There's no one food is better than the other kind of stuff. And we talked a little bit about that with the forbidden foods at the start there. So parents, it's important to model the right language and to not get into, this isn't a good food for you. This food is too high in sugar. This food is high in fat. Like doing some of that labeling of foods is a big problem when it comes to building that like conversation and that nutrition kind of positive conversation. It now is becoming just this sort of a good food, bad food conversation when we're using the wrong labels. Nutrition, to be healthy, we don't need to eat perfect. And I think some of those messages that parents can provide to kids around like, it's okay to eat foods that are a little bit less, full of vitamins, um, as part of a healthy diet. That is okay. And to model that, to be able to show like, hey, we eat a variety of things, and sometimes we have ice cream, and sometimes we have french fries, and sometimes we have salads, and sometimes we have chicken, and it's all very much equal. We do gently approach nutrition with kids, and it very much ranges on their age, right? What kind of messaging we're using for different age groups, right? Their understanding of things. Um, and that's a hard one to talk about because there's so many different ages and there's also just so many different levels of comprehension for different ages and different individuals. So it's hard to give you that one answer. But I just say, like, number one is be really careful to not label foods as good versus bad or using labels that sort of connotate that that food is bad. Because really all foods can fit, right?
Very true. What about the schools, how they're teaching? Like my kids come home and they're learning about carbs and proteins and fats and things like that. And we need to make sure we have enough milk. And, so it's being taught in schools in a certain way. How does that impact the mentality of a child and when they bring that information home to their parents?
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, like, I've had mixed reviews on some of the messaging that I've heard, and it definitely depends on the teacher and depends on the approach. Some individuals are bringing in their own personal baggage when it comes to the lessons that they're providing around nutrition. And unfortunately, the teachers aren't registered dietitians, right? And so they are provided with a curriculum to teach, but there can be those, variations that are sort of put in on the personal level. I'm not gonna say that happens all the time because I've had great teachers for my own children's upbringing that I'm like, "Wow, that's so awesome. She really did a beautiful lesson plan for, teaching Canada's food guide or teaching about the macronutrients. That's cool. I love that." Versus, sometimes I hear stories about, "Yeah, my teacher or my child's teacher said carbs are bad." And that we really shouldn't be packing any, or our child's lunch is too full of carbs, right? Those Some of those things, some of those messages that I do hear that I get upset by, where it really just varies, to be honest. But yeah, it's a tough one when you've got a variety of backgrounds coming in to teach these nutrition lessons to a variety of different kids that it's hard to generalize sometimes the messages without impacting somebody negatively, right? Sometimes a general message given to everybody without really knowing the ins and outs of everybody's backgrounds and everybody's like, you know, that can be risky. So when I consult people, I'm not doing group consults for a reason, right? I'm doing an individual consult because there's a lot to know medically about each person. There's a lot to know about the background with feeding with their parents and with, their own feeding struggles or their own like relationships with food. And it does get a little bit more complex as the kids get older, right? As we start getting into that teen year sort of time where some of those, body image concerns start creeping in and some of the more dieting kind of focus starts to come into their worlds. Yeah, it's a tough one. So I'm a little bit skewed on how we do it. How do we teach nutrition in schools without messing anybody up, to be honest?
Well, there's so many nuances. There's cultural, there's religious nuances. There's so many. And I remember when my oldest was in preschool, and this was just coming out of the pandemic, and I was speaking with another parent, and the teacher at the time pulled out. They had sent like a little packet of fish crackers, it was around Easter, so a little couple of Easter eggs, and the teacher removed them from the lunch kit and said, no, you can't eat this here. And it created quite the dialogue between the parent and the teacher and the school to say, I'm packing the lunches. And there's an affordability factor in many cases where, some parents, though they wish they could put as much fresh produce as possible in their kids' lunches, right now what works is a granola bar and some fish crackers and an applesauce or something. So it's really, there's so many nuances to how we pack our kids' lunches and how they learn about what they should eat and shouldn't eat and what's good. They might have allergies, sensitivities, restrictions. Again, those cultural nuances. So I agree. That's a tricky one.
It is so tricky. And, I often will do or I'll do visits at schools sometimes for some clients where we are working on more of that school environment for them if they're struggling with eating at school. And this will be more for kiddos that are, they're autistic or they've got, some government funding for services, things like that, where there's some more significant challenges, right? But yeah, I have been really shocked sometimes, and maybe not shocked, but like disappointed sometimes in what I see, where I've got kiddos who maybe have like 5 foods that they're accepting in total, right? That is all they're eating for various reasons, and their parents are getting called on the regular with critiques about what foods are being packed. And so it's really hard where for me, I'm so happy with a kiddo who's accepting 5 foods and all of a sudden they've accepted a 6th food. I don't care what that food is. If that food is a chocolate coated dipped granola bar, that is massive progress for that child. And I would love that chocolate dipped granola bar to show up in that lunchbox versus being called by the teacher to say, hey, there's a chocolate dipped granola bar. That's a terrible choice without them understanding that big picture, like you're referencing there too with finances. And I've got lots of people that are food insecure and the cost of an apple compared to the cost of a, pack of ramen noodles, right? Like, yeah, it's a no-brainer. They can't afford some of those healthier foods that, the teachers are hoping to see there. So it's just not so simple. And I really want schools and teachers to respect that the parents know the big picture, and it really is the parents' job to decide what. It is not the job of the teacher to decide what. And so I've got these beautiful little lunch cards that I send to families whenever situations like this come up, where, the teacher has maybe like pulled aside some foods and said, you know what, like you can't eat this until you eat this, or these foods are unhealthy, and I'm going to tell your parents, like those sorts of things. Um, I can find it for you, but I'm going to find it for you, but
Please. Absolutely. That's a big one. And I've got to be honest, when I think back on my childhood and eating in the classroom, I don't recall anyone commenting on anything in my lunch kit. And so I do think that it is a bit of a shift, and society has changed and there's more social pressure, and it's just a different world that we live in now. And also the curriculum has changed. Lots of things have changed. And so teachers, of course, they always have the best, hopefully they always have the best interest of their students in mind, but it can unfortunately, like you said, if they don't know the background to it, it could actually hinder more than progress that child in their journey.
Absolutely. So, I think asking questions, being curious, right? Don't just assume or don't provide that advice without knowing the full picture. And so there's the Ted Lasso, right? Be curious. We need to be curious. Everybody needs to be curious and trust that like the parents, sometimes they don't got it, but sometimes they really do. And I'd say more times than not, they do understand what's happening and their child is always in their best interest. And so like there's always opportunities sometimes to provide that support, but like just thinking about who's the right person to provide that support.
Yeah, and parents know their kids best, there's no doubt. So, what role does nutrition play in a child's academic performance and in their behavior? How can it affect their schoolwork, relationships, and self regulation abilities?
Yeah, I mean, it can affect it a lot. And, I just, well, today, for example, like I just had a consultation with a family where the kiddo is not eating very much and is very, dysregulated and, um, at school not doing well because they're very hungry. And, just even looking at like the amount of calories a child is or isn't eating in a day can really impact their performance at school in so many ways. It can also impact their sleep, which then impacts the next day. And so calories alone, attention is affected, regulation is affected, sleep is affected, like all of those things can definitely come into play. We do look more even at the micronutrient level of, iron deficiency, for example. It's so critical in brain development. And when a kid is chronically low iron, just that brain development is impacted. And we do know that kids who are iron deficient, regulation is usually quite off. Their ability to focus and have attention is off. Um, we look at their appetite, of course, is off. And so then again, that comes down to they're probably not consuming as much as they need. So not getting enough calories again, getting dysregulated because of that. There's a lot of things that just cycle, the chicken before the egg, kind of like this leads to this, leads to this, and so does this, and this leads to this, right? But yeah, like nutrition in general, like a child that doesn't have all their nutrient needs met, like there's a really deep web of activity going on in their body when things are off. If they're not getting all the nutrients they need, there are many impacts that we don't even know about directly that are probably going on under the surface. We might not see them directly in the moment, but over time and even in the lifespan, we know that there's impacts long term, right? Of not getting your nutrient needs met.
Okay, so you were just talking about iron regulation and other things that are going on in a child. So supplements and multivitamins, especially when it comes to kids, when are they helpful? When are they not? Are they all created equal? Should we, ideally be giving our children any type of supplementation or multivitamins? What's the thought process behind that?
So a big part of my job is to figure that out for each of the kids that I work with. And it varies, honestly. So when I'm trying to figure out what's happening with a kid and what recommendations are going to come forward for them, I do diet analysis. So I will take like 3 to 5 days of typical eating for the child and put that in a nutrition program to figure out like, okay, well, how much iron are they consuming on average? Like, what are those B vitamins? What's going on with calories and protein? What's happening with iron? All the different nutrients. And I'm able to compare that to what their estimated needs are for their age for each of those different things to figure out like, where are we doing well? And then where are the things that we've got some gaps? And so from there, I'm able to more customize to say like, oh, hey, like they're only low in vitamin D. Cool. They need a vitamin D supplement. And here's the recommended amount for vitamin D for their age. They're currently getting this much in their diet. So they need this much in a supplement, right? So that's one of the most simple kind of diet analysis results, but there's some where, they're missing. Today, for example, I analyzed a kiddo's diet. Every single nutrient need was not met. Every single one. And so in that situation, we were also in the situation of not enough calories, not enough protein, right? So that's where a multivitamin or separate vitamins and minerals is just not going to be enough for this kiddo. We need to actually look more at a supplement that's providing calories in addition to all those nutrients. So in that case, it was more of like a formula, looking at, it wasn't Pediasure for this particular kiddo, but something along those lines, similar to that, where they're actually having to take an additional supplement beverage. But what I would say to you is, like, when it comes to supplementation, every child is different. And sometimes there's so many blanket approaches where it's like, I've heard often, just give your kid a multivitamin. I have spreadsheets of multivitamins and none of them are the same. Like, none of them are the same. I have some that have zinc, some that don't have zinc, some that have iron, some that don't have iron, some that have, like a couple of the B vitamins and then a couple of the other ones that aren't there. And so when I analyze, if I just said to everybody, you all just need a multivitamin, I'm going to get, a huge chunk of those people are going to pick up one that's not the right fit. And a huge chunk of people that are going to, like, haphazardly pick a decent one that's going to cover some of the things that are low. So really it varies. And the best way to know if a kid is getting what they need and if they need a supplement or not is by going to a dietitian who's doing that nutrition analysis and supplement review like I'm doing, right? To really make sure we're in a good boat. So I do also look at supplements parents are already giving. So when I analyze the diet without the supplements added, and then I show them, this is the supplements you're giving. Do you see here that these actually aren't good matches? You can actually see it on the spreadsheet. It's not filling those gaps, or actually, hey, this is amazing. Look, you just took care of that with this particular supplement. Keep on that one, right? So yeah, it's more of like a factual approach versus just like a blanket statement.
There's so many complexities, and like you said, it's just kind of making your way through the web here. It's not one size fits all. You can see those multivitamins everywhere you go on the shelves, whether it's a department store or, like a health food store, they're everywhere. And you just grab one that's for the age range and, there you go. But that's not the right science there. You have to make sure that you're getting truly the right one for your child.
It can be like a massive waste of money. I've looked at a bunch of them and I'm like, wow, this thing is so expensive and it's like the worst fit for your child. Like, your child is already meeting all of those nutrient needs that this supplement is providing, but they're missing all of these ones that this supplement doesn't contain any of these things, right? So, and it's just, and sometimes the fixes are like the craziest, cheapest supplement option. And so it's nice to like just know, like, oh, there we go. This is, making good use of my money by picking the right one that actually is addressing the concerns.
And parents definitely want to put their money where it's worth it for sure anyways. So that's good advice. So for parents thinking about bringing their child in for a consultation or assessment, what can they expect? What does that first visit look like with you?
Yeah, usually it's not with their child, to be honest. Usually it's a conversation first with the parent. And I do always require an intake initially where they're answering a bunch of questions. I try to do that more prior to the appointment starting so they can fill that out before even meeting with me. I'm not charging them for that kind of stuff, right? So they fill out a questionnaire of all the common things that I really want to know about. And that first session is really to review everything there, because there are oftentimes things that come forward from that intake where I'm like, I need to talk more about that, or I have some suspicions here and there. And then to decide what are we going to do after that first review of the intake. Sometimes it's really clear cut where I'm like, yeah, I saw these things on the intake. We haven't had any follow up around those things. I need you to return to your doctor and do this, that, and the other, right? And then once you've got those things done, we're going to come back and we're going to talk about next steps after that, right? So it really is just, let's look at the data. Let's look at the information first of what you're bringing forward. And then let's decide where we want to go after that.
So for listeners who want to reach out to you or learn more about your services at Alberta Therapy Co., what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, so we have a couple of options. Like, we've got a great website, www.albertatherapyco.com. That's a great place to see me. There's some videos online of me, so you can certainly see what I look like and listen to me talk about a couple different things. Um, there's all my services listed there as well on the website. The other option is to call our clinic, and our phone number for that, for our Edmontonians and local people, are 780-441-1220. So that's another option there, and just talking to our lovely receptionists, and they can walk you through kind of options for booking. We do offer meet and greets that are free. So if you're really not sure, like, is this the right fit? Is she going to help me with what my concern is? Right? I want you to meet with me first. I don't want you paying a dime. You got to come meet with me first, and let's talk for 20 minutes. And then we'll decide where we want to go from there. So that's a great way to do it, is booking a free meet and greet. You can book that online through our online booking, just by starting at our website, or by calling the clinic and requesting that.
Awesome. And I'm sure a lot of parents, this probably spoke to them in so many different ways and levels. I know it did for me. And you put a lot of perspective into what mealtime should feel like and look like. Thank you so much for shedding light on a really important topic that can't be overlooked.
You're so welcome. I absolutely love what I do.
I can tell, and love the passion for it. So thank you so much for joining us.
No problem at all.
And that's a wrap for this episode. Thanks so much for joining us on Parenting Adventures. Remember, you're not alone in this journey, and we're always here to help. Parenting is like trying to fold a fitted sheet. It seems impossible at first, but with enough determination, you can make it work, kind of. If you're ready for the next step, visit tutorteach.ca/tutoring for personalized mindful tutoring, and discover how we've helped over 3,000 students reach their goals. Until next time, keep calm and fold on.